Good evening, friends. So we start the journey again. To our outer eye, our journey begins at a particular point of time in our present life and ends at another point of time. That's not how the divine sees the human journey. The mother says in one of her answers to a question of a disciple that we all have been together for many lives. And when did we decide to come together for this great work? Even before time was born. This is the great work for which the divine has been laboring since creation was first let forth from his womb and buried for its nurturance into a seeming womb of darkness. The Vedas speak about two mothers, Diti and Aditi. Diti is the mother of darkness, literally division, from which Daityas arise. She is the first mother. She nurtures the womb, she nurtures the child, the little baby which is forming, and then when the time is ready, she hands over the child to Aditi, the mother of light, so that evolution can take place no more under the spell of division and ignorance and death and suffering, but under the charm and grace of light and freedom and truth and bliss. But who is Diti? It is the Divine Mother herself who sacrifices that home of oneness and becomes this lower nature of ignorance. It is she who suffers. It is she who buries herself in the midst of this darkness, identifies with its substance, so that this painful mass, through pain, through joy, through everything, can grow towards that light, towards that real idea, towards that truth from which it is born. Once we know this secret, which Savitri reveals, it's the story of the divine playing with himself. After all, what is buried inside the darkness, the divine himself has gone and he sleeps there. And once this truth is revealed, it has a great liberative effect, because everywhere one begins to see, feel, sense that presence. For there is in fact nothing else but he, and all else is an appearance and a mask that he wears, because that is necessary for our progress. And the great drama starts with that great mask. The terrible mask of inconscience that the divine has worn. The very first book, Canto 1, is in many ways almost a summary of the entire book. It's almost in the line of the great traditions that the Sutradhar, or the person who has written or coordinates the play, he comes out and reveals what the story is about. So Canto 1 and Canto 2 in a way summarize the story. Canto 1 summarizes what this whole drama is about, of which Savitri is right now the center stage. But the whole drama is going on right from the very beginning. How from inconscience ignorance awakes, and how out of ignorance consciousness travels up and up through forms. It builds forms, it destroys forms, and carries them towards some great high event. So the whole background, the whole stage has been set. And it's also true of our own life, the symbol dawn. In our life too, dawn comes and brings plenitude, brings light. But most of all, as we will see later, Dawn invites us to resume the effort and the pang. That's the beauty. The mother says at one place that there are two aspects of grace. One is that it brings peace and solace, and everybody likes it. All of us want that aspect of grace. But there is another aspect of grace. It makes us put in effort. It invites us to climb. And not many people welcome it. But that's what dawn brings us. And just before dawn, there is the thick pall of night. In Savitri, in book 1, canto 2, we find some very beautiful lines where Aurobindo describes this very beginning at a more personal level. Here he is describing the dawn at a very cosmic level. And at a more personal level, he describes in the issue, page 11, an absolute supernatural darkness falls on man sometimes when he draws near to God. This is page 11, the last 6-7 lines. An absolute supernatural darkness falls on man sometimes when he draws near to God, an hour arrives when fail all nature's means. Forced out from the protecting ignorance and flung back on his naked primal need, he at length must cast from him his surface soul and be the ungarbed entity within. There is a primal need which is there, buried inside the darkness. We can visualize it as a seed. A seed has to grow into a mighty tree with beautiful scented flowers and fruits, tasty fruits. That is the idea within a seed. But where does the divine put it? Where does the farmer put it? He doesn't straight away throw it into the light or doesn't put it amidst beautiful things. He tills the earth, digs it deep, puts it there, and puts all the mire and waste inside it. Why? So that the protecting sheath of ignorance may slowly melt away, and the seed may take roots, and then it begins its journey upward, first through the darkness and then delivered into the light. This is the scheme of all things, because this is the scheme that the divine has set right at the time of creation. A dark, ambiguous field is created in which he buries his seed of grandeur. And slowly it must wake up, because if it's suddenly is exposed to too strong a light, it will melt away. In the Puranas, there is a very nice story to this effect, that when Brahma wants the creation to start, he creates 4 sages, Sanat Kumar, the 4 brothers. So they go for creation, but they soon turn back and say, no, we are not going to do this. Don't dupe us into this. Unless you put a veil, creation would not be. It just comes back and unites back into its source. So slowly and slowly, the evolutionary march, it was the hour before the gods awake. The first laborer in this world, the first worker, is the divine himself. Who are these gods? The beings who labor for light, for the victory of truth, for the advent of something of the divine here. The mother speaks about these gods in very interesting psychological terms. Of course, they are real beings. They are not just metaphors. They are realities of another plane, but they manifest in human beings as hope, as faith, as the will to be, as the will to progress, as light, as a search for truth, as the rain of intuition, as love and joy and peace. These gods must come later. Right now, it's a cosmic drowse. They will come later. First, the hard soil has to be tilled. Some hard work has to be done on earth. And therefore, it was the hour before the gods awake. Across the path of the divine event, the huge foreboding mind of night, alone in her unlit temple of eternity, lay stressed immobile upon silence marge. Almost one felt opaque, impenetrable. In the somber symbol of her eyeless muse, the abysm of the unbodied infinite, a fathomless zero occupied the world. When Sri Aurobindo was asked about this image, he said it's not an image, it's a real experience. And if you go into that realm, this is how you experience it. So it's not just he is describing it in poetic words and imagination about what the creation would be in its beginning. Sri Aurobindo has nowhere indulged in it in a kind of poetic fancy or romanticism. It is spiritual realism. Everything that he has described is an experience that he has gone through. And therefore he could give us that great assurance. Almost one felt opaque, impenetrable. A power of fallen boundless self awake between the first and the last nothingness, recalling the tenebrous womb from which it came, turned from the insoluble mystery of birth and the tardy process of mortality, and longed to reach its end in vacant naught. The birth in spiritual thought, in spiritual experience, birth is not about human birth. It's about assuming a form and an appearance. So, birth is equivalent to manifestation. Sri Aurobindo describes it at great length when he speaks about in the commentaries on the Ish Upanishad, where the poet speaks about birth and non-birth. He says birth in the deepest sense is about manifestation. So the insoluble mystery of birth, it's not just about human birth. In fact, in this book, everywhere we find, as in Sri Aurobindo's yoga, a constant link between earth and the manifestation upon earth and the supreme. Everywhere, whether it be in the inconscient, the earth will come in. Whether when Sri Aurobindo describes the human state, the earth will come in. When he is face to face with the supreme, the earth will come in. It's such a beautiful link that Sri Aurobindo weaves between the earth and the supreme. At nowhere the earth is forgotten. And this is interesting because many times being identified with our humanness, we are apt to think that yoga is for the sake of humanity, and it sounds very good. But to put it squarely, yoga is for the sake of the divine and for the earth nature. The importance of humanity is that as of now, humanity embodies the very highest that the earth nature can give birth to. That is the significance of humanity, and therefore it can become a beautiful link between what is hidden in the heart of earth and the supreme towards which it climbs. This first plunge of the divine into inconscience, which is being described here, which we spoke about yesterday, is the first manifestation of love. The mother speaks about it, says everything we have a habit of instinctively thinking in terms of human. When we talk of joy, we think of human joy. When we talk of peace, we think of human peace. And when we think of love, we think of human love. But the very first manifestation of love is when the divine plunged into this inconscience. He rushed into it and matter was crystallized. And she says that there is love even in stones. So she was asked, how is it there? Do the stones feel? She says, the power of love works in the stone to hold and bind the elements together. It holds creation together in its grasp and lifts it towards the Supreme through a constant offering, going from below and linking it to the Supreme. That is the labor of love. And that is why even in human consciousness, the highest expression of love is not when it moves at the same plane between two human beings, but when it moves from below, where we are, to that towards which we must move. The highest expression of love is love for the divine, because that is the labor of love. It's constantly pulling matter out of its inertia. It's constantly pulling life up towards a greater life. It's constantly pulling mind and thoughts towards a greater seeing, a greater vision. It's constantly pulling the spirit involved in the mind towards a greater being. This is the labor of love, and it starts right from the time earth begins its journey. As in a dark beginning of all things. What a reassurance and a hope. If there is darkness, it's a beginning. We read yesterday, he saw in destruction creation's hasty pace. Whenever there is darkness, we can be rest assured a new dawn is waiting for us. As in a dark beginning of all things, a mute, featureless semblance of the unknown. This is very interesting. Elsewhere, Aurobindo speaks about it, that there are two kinds of peace and calm that one can experience. There is a calm and peace of the inertia. It's a semblance, mute, featureless. And that's why it's so dangerous to drop the mind prematurely. There are some ways of yoga where it's taught, drop the mind. Dropping the mind does not necessarily lead us to the step higher. It may well be that we fall into the trap of the other end, where we enter a state which is mute, featureless, unknown, and we may well mistake it for some high state. But this is nothing else but a dip into the inconscient. And this was known in the ancient times. It was called as Jad Samadhi. And Aurobindo speaks about it, this danger that one may, instead of going into the state of Parabrahman, one goes into the inconscient. And he even says it's a very dangerous state. And so he has used a very beautiful word, a mute, featureless semblance of the unknown. It's a semblance. The unknown is also mute, featureless. But that muteness, that featureness is fully conscious, self-aware, full of the power to manifest everything. Here all that is asleep, unconscious. Repeating forever the unconscious act, prolonging forever the unseeing will, cradle the cosmic drowse of ignorant force. It's very interesting. We can relate with all these things in our everyday life of yoga. When we wake up in the morning, we are heavily under the influence of this state. All these states are there in us. And when we wake up, we are half awake, half asleep. Mechanically we get up, mechanically we walk to the bathroom, and after a while, feeling, sense, thought returns. In Savitri, there is a description of this process, how we wake up. And sometimes we can be caught up in certain states of consciousness, which we as ignorant psychologists describe as depression. But what is it? But a heavy influence of this state, so much so that we don't feel any joy, any will, any faith. Mechanically we live. And here there is a description of that. Mechanically things are happening. Mechanically the earth is moving, abandoned. It doesn't have a will to be. Where it has to move, where it has to go. There is no aim, there is no direction. But Aurobindo tells us that even in this cosmic drowse, there is something behind that wakes in our sleep and sleeps when awake, and is pushing the cradle of the cosmic drowse. It is leading the journey even in our ignorance, and carries, whose moved creative slumber kindles the suns and carries our lives in its somnambulist whirl. In Indian mythology, we have a very nice image of Vishnu who is asleep. He is asleep on an ocean. So it's that ocean of milk, which is essentially an ocean of knowledge. Milk in the inner vision and otherwise represents knowledge. And on that there is that great serpent energy, the many hooded serpent, on whose head there is the earth, and in its heart sleeps the great being, from whose navel there springs up as a lotus the creatrix consciousness of Brahma. This whole image is a very apt image, that upon the ocean of knowledge there is the being who has fallen asleep, who sleeps, but in his sleep he creates. And the infinite snake, the Anant Nag or the Shesh, that is the infinite energy which lies coiled into the very base of inconscient. It is that energy which pushes through the earth, which pushes the earth upward and upward and upward. On its head, hooded head, we see the earth. As it opens up, the earth advances. It's an image of the entire evolutionary journey. Behind all labor of earth, behind all its evolutionary urge, behind every movement, there is an aspect which is unconscious. We don't know where our lives are being carried in its somnambulist world. Sometimes we wonder, okay, today we are very fortunate, we have the privilege of Savitri and Aurobindo and the mother. Still sometimes one wonders, where is this caravan leading us? Aurobindo tells us it cannot be misled, because in the front there is the divine pulling it, attracting it, the magnet of our difficult ascent. And behind it is again the divine pushing it constantly. His failure is not failure, whom God leads. And how shall the end be vain when God is guide? So from both sides there is a pressure. The divine has made sure that his plan is free of all loopholes. There may be accidents of time, seemingly. There may be the play of chance, seemingly. There may be all kinds of seeming catastrophes. But this is going to be that this earth will grow divine, because in front it is she who has kindled the suns. Behind it is she whose hands alone can change time's dragon base. It is she who sleeps as the infinite energy in the inconscience and pushes earth upward. Athwart the vain enormous trance of space. How are time and space born? We have all kinds of musings about it. And in one single sentence in the Life Divine, Aurobindo makes it so beautifully simple. When Brahman extends himself, he becomes space. When Brahman moves, is in motion, it becomes time. Both time and space is nothing else but He. Both time and timelessness sink in that wave, in that sea. Time becomes a wave, space a wandering drop. Many times and spaces are born out of that. As Brahman extends himself in different status of his being, he becomes space and time. It's a trance of space, it's a trance of Brahman that extends itself as space. A shadow spinning through a soulless void, its formless stupor without mind or life. A shadow spinning through a soulless void, thrown back once more into unthinking dreams. Earth wheeled, abandoned in the hollow gulfs. From the cosmos, from the inconscient energy, from the great divine event, Sri Aurobindo brings up the focus. He says, now I'll take you to the stage. If we were to visualize it, we could almost see that the great poet is introducing the play. And he shows us first the entire darkness and then many stars, and then he's focusing on to the scene of the great event and brings us on focus earth. Here is the great drama being enacted. And then he will take us to that place where the sylvan peace amidst the hills, where Savitri and Satyavan are there. But earth is the stage. Earth veiled, abandoned in the hollow gulfs, forgetful of her spirit and her fate. There is no real abandonment. This is the beauty. Sri Aurobindo qualifies that abandonment. Earth is not abandoned, but she has the sense of being abandoned because she is forgetful. Forgetful of her spirit, forgetful of her fate. She is moving mechanically, not knowing what's going to happen. The impassive skies were neutral, empty, still. And now the Act 1, Scene 1 starts. There is that stillness at the beginning of creation, the stillness of the inconscience, and something will begin to stir it. Then something in the inscrutable darkness stirred. I suppose this must have been the most difficult part of the divine work, to shake the dragon base, to stir inconscience. And if that can happen, all the rest is a foregone conclusion. Then something in the inscrutable darkness stirred, a nameless movement, an unthought idea. Insistent, dissatisfied, without a name. Something that wished but knew not how to be, teased the inconscient to wake ignorance. How many levels we can apply this? From the most cosmic to the most mundane. It is a beautiful description of the very first thing which wakes out of inconscience is ignorance. Normally in traditional spiritual literature we find the distinction between ignorance and knowledge, avidya and vidya. Sri Aurobindo makes a further distinction. He speaks about inconscience. Ignorance in its extreme, where there is total seeming unconsciousness. There is nowhere where consciousness is not. But it seems that there is no consciousness there, is inconscience. But out of that, the first thing that will arise is not that straight away inconscience will leap into the supreme, is ignorance. Ignorance is partial awareness. And this journey of ignorance will carry on from the little worm, from the little cell, from the little parcel of life, that little vibratory mode. It will carry on right up to man. The journey of ignorance, lesser and lesser ignorance. First thing that wakes out of inconscience is ignorance. And what a marvel of expression, teased inconscience. We always feel the divine touch is very soothing. It is, of course, but it can be very teasing also, because when the divine touches us, he inspires us to resume effort and labor. He doesn't allow us to sleep. We would prefer that when the morning sun comes, we want, maybe this is a select group, but it's very common. Pull the curtains, another hour of sleep. We don't like. We feel the sun has come to tease us. Oh, I wish I could sleep for another couple of hours. This is a repetition of the original. This is happening not only today. Mothers often tell children, oh, he doesn't get up, it's morning, why don't you get up? We can almost visualize the divine doing this, telling in conscience, wake up, wake up, wake up. Oh, please let me sleep. I have slept for 1,000,000 years. Would you allow me to sleep for another 1,000,000 years? Divine is teasing, get up. So it gets up with, in a state of, why did you wake me up? The first response is anger, ignorance. These are ignorant responses. Inconscience wakes up, why did you wake me up? So, what a marvelous line. And in that state, what is the state? We can visualize it. It's so true in our own life, in the life of humanity. Sometimes we feel sorry, we are very happy that we have got a name of life and we are so grateful. And in our over enthusiasm, we wish everybody has the name or sometimes the same aim. But it has to take steps and stages. The very first beginning is dissatisfied without a name. This is how ignorance operates. So there is a whole stage of humanity when there is just a sense of general dissatisfaction. And this dissatisfaction, far from being evil, is a great boon. In the life divine, Aurobindo speaks about it. He says, the animal is satisfied with a modicum of necessities. The gods are content with their splendor. Man, of all the creatures, is the most dissatisfied of all. And therefore, he alone of all the beings has this possibility of being seized by a frenzy to arrive at that. He has got that. He is dissatisfied. Nothing satisfied him. Why? Because what is goading us to seek, what is behind the will to be, infinite. How can we be satisfied with finite things? It's a logical absurdity, because behind us is infinite. At our place sleeps the infinite. Attracting us is the infinite. All around us is the infinite. How can we ever be satisfied with the finite? And that is right from the beginning. The script is written, thou shalt not be satisfied with finite things, because thou art the traveler of the infinite. Therefore, the very first movement, insistent, dissatisfied without a name. And yet this is a seeming, because behind it there is a name. It's like in a play, the character doesn't know. Or those who are watching, they don't know what's going to happen. Or the character is so identified that he has to forget that I am, if you want to really act well, you have to forget that you are basically alive, and even though you are shot well, nothing is going to happen to you. If you remember that, you can't act well. The best actors are those who are self-forgetful completely. If you are self-conscious, you can't act. So here is a seeming, dissatisfied without a name, something that wished but knew not how to be. And that is why the more we grow closer and closer, the more dissatisfaction, the more feeling of wanting, but what we are wanting we don't know. A throe that came and left a quivering trace gave room for an old, tired want unfilled, at peace in its subconscient, moonless cave, to raise its head and look for absent light. So here Aurobindo is telling us it's not only once but several times creation sinks into that anomalous base and raises up again at individual level, at the level of group soul, at the level of creation earth. We have faced dissolution several times. The mother speaks about 6 times there have been the great pralaya, and she says this is the 7th time that creation is emerging out of that inconscience. But this time it will not have to face one of those pralayas, one of those catastrophes which plunges an entire civilization into chaos and darkness. So several times this has happened, and that seems peaceful. This is the way ignorance finds peace. Ignorance finds peace in the breast of inconscience, whereas knowledge finds peace in the heart of love. That is the difference. When we are living in ignorance, we want to just get tired and plunge ourselves into that sleep of inconscience. But when we are in a beautiful state, then we want to sleep in the lap of the Divine Mother. So here he is speaking about an ignorant creation plunging back into inconscience, again coming up, and that peace has to be disturbed. Its peace is disturbed. And what comes in its place? A throe. It's a pang. A pang which is there. It becomes, it's like when we sleep with a chest pain and we sleep off. We don't know, we forget the pain. When we get up, for a while everything is okay, and again the pain begins. There is a pang in creation. This earth is packed with labor and with strife. It's the labor pains to raise its head and look for absent light. Straining closed eyes of vanished memory. When we have just awoken, we have not yet looked at the time, at the watch, eyes are still closed, and we are still thinking, oh, what was that dream which I have seen? What is it that I have to do? Straining closed eyes of vanished memory, like one who searches for a bygone self and only meets the corpse of his desire. It was as though even in this naught's profound, even in this ultimate dissolution's core, there lurked an unremembering entity, survivor of a slain and buried past, condemned to resume the effort and the pang. When we have these stories, in stories of Noah's Ark and the story of King Satyavrat, of Pralaya, that one sample of everything is saved in the great boat. And it's very interesting, in the Indian parable, when the fish is carrying the boat, a great demon comes and says, what have you come here for? And the fish says something very strange. It says, I have come to rescue the Vedas. It cannot speak, it cannot lecture, it's not an intellectual, it is not seemingly a spiritual being. God has become a fish and says, I have come to rescue the Vedas. So what you are carrying in this boat, I am carrying the Vedas and you can't touch it. It is that knowledge which is at the root of creation. It seeds, essential knowledge, all those seeds are preserved. Even in Pralaya, even in death, everything is not destroyed. Something remains unslain. We bury the body, we burn it, but from the pyre and the ashes we rise. There is a very beautiful poem of Sri Aurobindo, the triumph song of Trishanku. We all know about Trishanku, who wanted to become immortal in his physical body. It's a very interesting story. It's one of the first efforts at physical immortality. But he's not ready. Vishwamitra is very eager to catapult him up to heaven. But the heavens test him. There is a gatekeeper with a you have to pass through a metal detector. So when he passes through the metal detector, he says, so much of humanness is there in you. You cannot be allowed an entry. He says, I have an identity card signed with Vishwamitra. He says, this is not a place where these identity cards will work. We have very simple thing. Pass through this. He says, I am very fine person. I have been very good. I have followed all the principles, very moral, very just. He says, we have no such criteria, sir. Pass through this metal detector. If you are okay, go in. If not, go back. The mother speaks about it literally when she speaks about the supramental boat. She says, those beings come and test. And she says, how do they test? She says, they simply test the stuff of consciousness. And she goes on to say, she says, and the criterion is not at all moral, or at least what we call here as things which are good, things which are bad, all these things. They just test the stuff of consciousness. And if you are ready, she says, pass through. It's a very different way. So Trisanku's story is the story of that, but he is half ready, half not. He is thrown back, his fate hangs in the balance between God's yes and no. But Sri Aurobindo gives this story a very fascinating turn. The effort of Trishanku again and again, 3 times he tries. And he says, my house consumes not I. Even though I die, even though I am buried and burned to ashes, something from within me rises out of the pyre and resumes the journey, resumes the great effort. And here we find those beautiful lines that even in this ultimate dissolution score, there lurked an unremembering entity, survivor of a slain and buried past, condemned to resume the effort and the pang. What is this effort and the pang? We have our own idea of what we should want in life, but there is a primal need. Reviving in another frustrate world, an unshaped consciousness desired light. And a blank prescience yearned towards distant change. We seek for light. We seek for freedom. We seek for truth. We seek for bliss. We seek for immortality. Roti, kapda, makan is only our maybe the first needs of the body, but the human aspiration, Sri Aurobindo speaks about it and says, the earliest preoccupation of man, or so it seems, his inevitable preoccupation, for it returns after every period of banishment and skepticism and denials, is also the one that seems to be his ultimate preoccupation. The first formula of wisdom promises to be the last. God, light, freedom, immortality. We will resume the effort after a break.